We're going to continue right away with a Tomorrow Fund-inspired session. So you heard earlier about, well, you quickly heard about the Tomorrow Fund, what we're doing in frontier tech, trying to finance breakthrough solutions to the world's largest problems. And today, I'm super happy that we have David and Niels with us. So I'm only going to do the quick intro, but then you guys, you can tell us the actual details. So Niels here on my left, he's a unicorn founder. He started SUNFIRE, so it's a company in the green hydrogen space, and did that actually 13 years ago. So he was the one that I was referring to with the overnight success that took 13 years to build. So yeah, I'm very happy that you're here. And then we have David. David is, yeah, I think you tried starting lots of companies in the early days. Then that didn't go anywhere. And then you were always an avid gamer. And then David started Unity. So it's a decacorn company in the game engine space. And David transitioned to Transition. So David's new fund, which is called Transition, is climate focused. And I'm super happy to have the two of you here. And I would say, maybe actually starting with Niels, that you give a proper intro to what SUNFIRE is actually all about. And then we'll continue with David.
Pleasure to do so. Thanks, Sebastian. Great to be here. What is SUNFIRE doing? SUNFIRE is a fully vertically integrated manufacturer of so-called electrolyzers. So big technical devices that the smallest single unit we build is 12 meters long and has a weight of 100 tons. And those devices turn water with renewable electricity into hydrogen. And we produce them from the membranes to the cells to the systems, all of it in-house in our production sites. We're about 600 people. We have around 200 million euro in direct backlog, another 300-400 million euro in framework agreements, typically with big industrial groups, RWE, Total, Uniper, and the like, so big refiners, energy companies, steel makers. I would say we're amongst probably the top 5 electrolyzer companies in the space, and fully VC funded. Yeah.
And we'll talk about why hydrogen is actually super relevant for the energy transition. But we'll do that in a second. But just to also translate maybe for the ones who are not familiar yet with electrolysis and hydrogen. So to put it very simply, you have water and then you put electricity in it, and then you split H2O water into its 2 components, so hydrogen and oxygen. So that's what you're doing on industrial scale. And then, yeah, David, let's continue with you. How did you go from trying to start lots of companies to then starting Unity and then making that shift to climate?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I was a programmer. I always knew I had to be a founder of something because I couldn't work for anyone else. That's still the case. And then, yeah, I started like 4-ish companies that were like complete nullities. They didn't even fail. There was like nothing there. Projects you could think of as. And then at some point, a friend of mine wanted to make video games. We tried to make video games. Built software for ourselves to make video games. Realized that our software was unusual, differently shaped than everything else. So we just kind of went for it. And yeah, that's still running. I'm still on the board. If you follow tech news, it's been a pretty painful week for us. But I'm not going to go into that. 9 years ago, I stepped out of my operating role. I did a bunch of angel investing, because that's what unemployable founders do. And in those journeys, I came across climate tech, right? So people that were solving these kind of massive problems that we face as civilization. And it felt like coming home, because I knew what to do with these people. I was quite worried about the climate crisis like everyone else, but I'm not a politician. I'm a very failed scientist. I don't think I'm a very useful activist. I'm not patient enough. But I knew what to do with these. I invested as an angel. I became an LP in pretty much any reasonably credible climate tech fund for a while. And with these kind of 2 lenses, I came to believe that Europe needed like a particularly structured venture firm for kind of core venture, Series Seed and A, which is what I started building almost 3 years ago.
So I'm once again in the role of translating what you've done before. So anybody who played Pokemon Go, essentially that was built on top of Unity's platform. So
yeah, something like half the video games in the world and 70% of mobile games at this point.
And what is it that, if there's anything that you think the game industry can learn from the climate space, or actually vice versa, maybe that's even more interesting, what can the climate space learn from the gaming industry? Is there anything?
That's a good question. Okay, one fun thing about running Unity, it's not a game company, it's a software company, supplying the games industry. And it's very strategic because we interact with the chips and the developers and the analytics companies and the ads businesses and the operating systems and everything around us is kind of, we're operating on this big system. And that was really fun. It was one of my great pleasures of running Unity was that it's this kind of big strategic, multi-dimensional thing you're operating in. And then when I was an angel investor afterwards, I didn't get that because every company was just like making a gizmo, selling it. And it's really fun to work with founders, so I'm doing that. But when I started working in climate, suddenly I'm back to this kind of big systems thinking. And that's really fun.
As in, within climate, everything really ties together, and we'll put a spotlight today on hydrogen, but what you're saying is, because we have to transition ultimately the entire industry or the entire economy, it starts with the cows that are on the farm, the food that we consume.
Absolutely. And we have this massive crisis, right? It's insanely big. But it's actually only one of several crises. Like the other crises are of biodiversity and soil health and ocean acidification. Ozone is the one system we managed, right? But there's like 5 others, fertilizer runoff and so on and so forth. And the climate crisis is horrible, but it's also fortunately big enough that it rises to the attention of the general kind of population. And if I'm an optimist, which I sometimes am, I see that maybe the magnitude of that crisis is enough to kind of force us into doing something. And maybe that becomes an excuse for us to redevelop, re-engineer, rebuild the old industrial system, which is an unbelievably wasteful, loud, ugly, unhealthy, and we get to reinvent like tens of thousands of new industrial processes, food, transportation, and so on, and of course fuels.
Yeah, and let's go there. So I think since we have NILS on stage with us, who's probably one of the experts in hydrogen, I think it would be good for, let's say, the audience to actually get a view on the role of hydrogen. How does the hydrogen economy, how does it actually work? What are the components when it comes to transport, hydrogen as an energy storage means, etc. So maybe you could enlighten us in, say, simple words, so all of us are on the same page, and then we can take that to go from there.
Yeah. So I think first of all, it's very important to understand that on this planet we use energy in very different forms. We use energy in the form of electricity, and over decades we have learned how to decarbonize that sector with solar electricity, with wind electricity. And roughly 20% of the energy we use, if you want, is in the form of power. So for that, we have great solutions that work commercially, and no one's asking whether it makes more sense to build a coal-fired power plant or a big wind farm. It's relatively clear what makes more sense economically and also for the planet. But then there's 80% of the energy we consume, which is not consumed in the form of electrons, but which is used in the form of chemical energy. And today that is almost exclusively fossil oil, fossil gas, or fossil coal. And this area of energy is responsible for the majority of the 50 gigatons of CO2 emissions that we have each single year on this planet. And while the key effort, number one, has to be to electrify as much as possible directly through battery electric vehicles, through heat pumps, through electrification of industry, it's also completely clear that in the long term, we won't be able to live without molecules. And that's where hydrogen comes into the equation. Hydrogen is a chemical molecule that can be used in the pure form in order to substitute some of the things we do with oil, coal, and gas. But hydrogen can also be combined with other molecules in order to form other more complex chemical structures that we will also need in our life. So I don't know, the wristband of my watch is made out of oil. You could use hydrogen, combine it with other molecules, and produce renewable wristbands for Swatch watches. And so hydrogen is really, if you want, a Swiss knife or a multifaceted option in order to replace all those different things. And could go a bit deeper into different things that you can make out of hydrogen or with hydrogen. On the one hand side, for example, you can replace coal in the production of steel. So when we turn iron ore into steel, we today use a lot of fossil coal. Hydrogen can be used to do the same thing without any carbon dioxide emission, and the steel sector is responsible
already
for that.
doing with Salzgitter, for example.
Exactly. So one of our key clients is the second biggest steel company in Germany. They're responsible for 2% of the German CO2 emissions, and they are on a clear path to substitute coal in the production of steel by using green hydrogen. Another nice example is fertilizers. So we use a huge amount of fertilizers to produce the food we eat. And that is produced using natural gas that we take out of the ground, and in the production of fertilizers we emit 6% of global carbon dioxide emissions. Hydrogen can be used again in combination with other molecules to substitute fertilizers. And just very quickly, one last one. You can use hydrogen and combine it with carbon to produce jet fuel. So you could potentially fly big planes using hydrogen-based fuels without or with very limited emissions compared to what we do today. So it's really this option for a multitude of different applications to decarbonize them.
And I don't think, maybe many of you have not thought about fertilizers, so just picking up on what you just said, and what a critical, huge role fertilizers actually play for humanity. So there's a process called the Haber-Bosch process, which was invented about 100 years ago. It hasn't changed ever since. It relies heavily on fossil fuels. It's very energy intensive, but it actually, it's two dudes, Mr. Haber, Mr. Bosch, who invented this process. And actually due to that, and thanks to that, we have to say, we are actually only able to sustain and to produce the food that actually keep all of us alive. If that process hadn't been invented 100 years ago, then the population would only be about half. So 4 billion people, and maybe that sounds like a solution to some of our problems. But
that would have been nice.
But unfortunately, that process wouldn't have been so seamless. So AKA, there would have been, lots of people would have starved to death. So we can actually be very grateful, but that process is outdated and needs to be either supplanted or added with by hydrogen-based processes or some others. We also invested in a company in that space. And okay, I think that gave all of us a good intro. David, I'm not sure how much you looked into the hydrogen space. What excites you in that area?
Sure. So when we got started with building what is now Transition.vc, we were looking for what's the framing for what we do. And as I sort of alluded to, greenhouse gas emissions resulting in global warming are unbelievably important, but there are a number of other crises around us, and they're all interconnected, and maybe climate change is the nexus of them. So we decided that we would operate on that slightly larger set than just greenhouse gas emissions. Looking at that, some of it is software, optimization, management of different things, counting of carbon emissions. It's not going to solve the problem, but we can't solve the problem without measuring it. So these are important tasks. One of the topics we really like and look at a lot is using synthetic biology processes. There's like a toolbox developed in the last 20, 30 years that is unbelievably powerful and can address a lot of these problems. So those are some of the things we look at. There's a few others, but yeah, hydrogen is actually one we've not really looked at. We know it's important, but it's a deep dive we haven't taken. And obviously, some companies are doing great work already and are well funded. So that's how we think about it.
And what would you say as a fund? What do you actually do differently? So you are a former founder. You teamed up with your brother, with Ari, to start Transition. You're based out of Reykjavik, so Iceland, which is also a place.
I am. The fund is in London.
The fund is in London. You guys spend a lot of time there, and I think you also said that it makes sense for you guys to come from there, and it also offers some advantages. But maybe you could also, in your own words.
Yeah. So, we have this, so my brother came from Index Ventures, where he probably got some of the best training that venture has to offer in Europe. And we're looking at the framing of this, and our hunch was, and I think it's proving right, that venture should be done by investors and operators, not necessarily scientists. Although a bunch of us have some kind of scientific background. So we try to build kind of a best-in-class venture platform with kind of the knowledge of what great looks like, how to build great big companies, and all the analysis work that the best venture firms do, and then combine it with a group of venture partners who are kind of the leading operators in climate tech. And when we were getting started, we thought we have a bunch of scientists around us, and we have some scientists, but it ends up being finance, regulatory, building engineering installations, those types of kind of really getting your hands dirty topics that the companies at seed and especially Series A really need. So that's the kind of platform we've been building.
And from my side, I mean, we couldn't agree more. What you heard earlier, what we're building, what we have built with Visionaries is also, to some extent, we've seen the same problem. We also came in as operators. We, then teamed up with our LPs, so deep industrial expertise and backgrounds and access to networks that otherwise you wouldn't have. And on the other hand, those high growth founders, 45 plus unicorn founders who invested in Visionaries. And to us, that's probably one of the best value adds that we can give to founders, especially actually in the frontier climate space. But I'm saying that, but not sure, Niels, if you would actually agree. I mean, what were you looking for in investors, and what would the ideal investor look like to you?
So we've decided from a relatively early point in time not to go too much into the direction of strategic investors, because we always try to keep that separate and say our operative business and the partnerships we have, we don't let into our cap table. Not because strategics can't be good investors, but having so many different options and so much unclarity which markets will open up first for us, we thought it was not a good idea to link too quickly to the strategic side. So eventually we
when I was running Unity, sorry to interrupt, strategics would come to us, and I always said, I like revenue, like buy something from me. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but I mean, in our case, it was really trying to stay away from that side, not to be kind of sucked in too much, and so very much.
But you have done it a little bit, right? With Amazon, for example, who came on board, who also, I think there's also an off-take agreement, ideally, or maybe a potential in place at some point.
But the route is always very much, we want investors that want a return from their investment, and they focus on that and help us create a good governance structure and help us with contacts and those kind of things, but no mix-up of strategic interests in the shareholder structure of the business. And I think we were relatively fortunate to have been able to select also the right people that fit with us and keep those two things a bit separate. So financial investors, people who are focusing on returns and on their investment is the focus.
Let's take that and actually maybe move to a meta level, so to the European level. We talked about Europe before. I think Europe is one of those places where, because of our industrial heritage, there is huge potential, especially in climate. What do you guys think, if Europe wants to become #1 for climate innovation and climate commercialization, what are we good at? What do we still need?
Can I start? Yeah.
Either one.
So first of all, what I observe personally, and actually that's a big source of motivation for me and for what I do, is I observe that in the course of the past 24 months, there has been quite a negative view on the industrial location Europe, on the industrial companies in Europe, on what governments are doing. At SUNFIRE, I was saying it's almost like a bit of a deindustrialization blues. Everyone's negative, everything is going to the US and China. What is our role going to be in the future? And what we do is, when we grow, and we're growing from a couple of megawatt to gigawatt, which is a huge step up, is we always look for partnerships with traditional companies that know how to take things to a professional level, that companies that know how to produce stuff at big scale. And I think that in Europe we are in the fortunate position that we still have amazing mechanical engineering, plant engineering, a great automotive industry that has so many, so valuable competences that we can use in order to take a new topic to a level that needs to be so enormous if we want to tackle the problem. This is really a big benefit. And in Germany, we often have those two words, German Angst. Yeah? We're always afraid of doing things and taking things forward. And I think the hydrogen topic, the construction of this equipment, which is so similar to what we have done over the past 80 years in Europe, building good combustion engines, building good chemical plants, the skills you need there are so similar to the skills that we need with our topic that I think it's less about German or European Angst. It's a topic that is more about European optimism and really a story that can motivate people and bring partners together. And there's, for me, if I look at the 80 years in Europe, what made us strong was technical know-how, networks and synergies between partners in the value chains, and differentiated high technologies. So not repetitive commodity business, but differentiated complex technology. And I think our topic is a topic that needs all those three areas and that fits beautifully into what we have in Europe. So I think it's also from that perspective, so thinking about the title, it's not just prosperity for the planet, but also for the people, and that's a beautiful side of that business.
And looking at the time, maybe David, quick answer?
Yeah, I'll try to be fast. But I am actually...
You can do that. So.
I'm a little frustrated because when we got started, things looked great. All the talent in Europe, a lot of good companies coming up. Of course, also in the US. We're investing cross-Atlantic, but we're really a European firm, and we're happy to help companies go both ways over the Atlantic. Then the Inflation Reduction Act comes out in the US with trillions, literally, of giveaways. And that creates enormous gravity wells for companies to cross the Atlantic early, not just with plants and sales, but actually moving. And then they go there, and then they can sell back into Europe, where companies, which is good, are forced to decarbonize. So the most sophisticated buyers of these technologies are actually in Europe, largely, right? Yeah. I think the US is getting away with it again, getting all the industry over, or a lot of it, not all of it, and then selling back into Europe. I think it's very frustrating to watch. Europe has to get in the game. And if funding is that, then they have to do that. And it's painful, it's annoying. We wish the US had more regulation, so that they would also be forced to decarbonize there. They're really not, or not so much. So yeah, it's actually very frustrating. Europe is really falling behind. The talent is here, we got great companies, and many of them are going to move.
That's why I'm glad that we're on stage here together.
Yeah, I think what's important is the storytelling element, and to create a bit of hope and say, okay, this is a strategic sector that we are good at. Today, out of 15 companies in my space, 10 are based in Europe. So we have a real chance to actually take a great position. And I think we need to become a bit smarter on the political level to not let that go away into other hands. But again, I have hope that there's a bit better understanding than maybe we had in the nuclear sector or in other sectors in the European energy industry where we've let topics go away. So I'm hopeful that we'll be a bit smarter.
And at least looking at your example of SUNFIRE, I don't know when the German Minister of Economics, I think he just visited you in Dresden and handed over a nice check. So at least there are positive signs, and I think that all of us here are together today under this motto of building to endure. Coming from first principle, I think that makes a lot of sense. I want to turn to...
There's one more framing that I think is important. Sorry to cut in. It's that, sometimes you look at, regulation in the countries I've spent time, Denmark, Iceland, and definitely Europe as well, where it's like, we're going to be neutral here. We're not going to emit more. That's good. And that's the end. But that's not the end. The emissions here are pretty small on a global scale. Our mission has to be to develop the technologies, export the technologies, so that we can save the planet together. Because we can't save Europe by not emitting carbon here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I just wanted to get using the last few minutes, regardless of whether you are in the climate space or not, I just wanted to use your presence here and your founding stories, this 13 years overnight success in the making, you having run Unity for 20 years. I just wanted to get that some lessons learned, that you had decisions that you made that looking backwards you would have made differently, mistakes that you've made, where somebody who's now here in the audience about to start a company, where you would say, yeah, please do that differently.
Actually, if I can just slightly adapt the answer first by saying it's super nice to be in an environment like that, because I come from a world where we put 100 tons of steel into an industrial plant and we operate that. And this is, in a way, a very simple engineering, mechanical type of work. There is, in my opinion, pretty significant potential in AI, for example, when it comes to autonomous operation of our equipment. I know that some of the partners we work with that are helping to take our equipment into operation do that better without any human beings involved in it. And this is a side that is interesting. We've had massive problems with the certification of the hydrogen that comes out of our machines, where I'm 100% sure that there are smarter ways of doing it than what the German government is proposing. So I think when coming from the software world, getting together with people also in our world and trying to find things that can be done, I think can be extremely powerful and have a massive impact. So that's an invitation to engage in that part of the discussion.
And actually, I really like that approach. I think when I started my company pre-Visionaries, that was 2013. Back then, I think it wasn't easy to find a business idea, but I think it was, relatively speaking, more easier, I think is the right word. But now going as a founder in SPE, actually collaborating very closely, going into a specific industry, trying to figure out how can I be of value here, what are the shortcomings in this particular industry, and then starting a company on those points that you, for example, just mentioned. I really like that approach. David, any lessons learned? If you were to speak to the David 20 years ago, I mean, don't change fees is probably one. No, sorry.
It's funny.
That was the big Unity thing.
Fortunately, most people haven't read that
piece
of news, but it's a shitty moment. I don't know. Just care. Okay, I mean, one thing I learned being a founder, I'm very light touch, very gentle. But I learned as I built my company, nobody will ever care more about your company than you do. And so that forces you, and also gives you permission just to care a lot and show that you care, and care about the nuances, and care about the people, and care about getting rid of non-performers, and care about the customers, and just show care. I don't know, I should have done more of that in the early days. I was so intellectual and gentle,
Okay, I think that's I really like those words. And with that, thank you very much, and thank you guys especially.
Thanks, Sebastian.
Thanks a bunch. Thank you.